Banned Books Week is an annual celebration and acknowledgement of the importance of free and open access to information. Since 1982, Banned Books Week has brought together librarians, educators, authors, publishers, booksellers, organizations, and readers to reject the notion of censorship and bring light to books that have encountered challenges to their availability or threats of complete removal from schools, libraries, or other public educational institutions.
When a book is challenged, it means that a person or group is attempting to remove the book as access or based on something they find objectionable. When a book is banned, that means the material has actually been removed from somewhere it used to be publicly available to everyone, whether that's in a public school curriculum or from a library shelf. Many times, books are challenged by people or groups who disagree with the content of a book, whether that be religious or political viewpoints, or something they find inappropriate, offensive, or uncomfortable. In recent years, the American Library Association has identified that many books being challenged are those with LGBTQ plus characters or books dealing with difficult topics such as racism or social injustice.
The right to read and freedom to access unrestricted information has long been a cornerstone of American democracy, and one that is protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution. Reading is a foundational skill for learning and growing as an informed citizen. Banned Books Week acknowledges the importance of allowing individuals to decide what to read, not the government or special interest groups deciding for them.
I'm Rachel. I am an assistant librarian at EVPL Central.
I'm Kelli, and I'm a programming librarian at EVPL Central. Today, we have a variety of expert panelists, librarians, researchers, educators, and authors who are going to share their perspectives around the topic of book banning and help us shed light on the notion of censorship in 2025.
Hello, I'm really glad to be here. I'm a professor of history at the University of Evansville. I've been living in Evansville for 26 years, and I'm the author of 4 books.
Hi, I'm Lisa Hale. I'm an associate professor of education at the University of Evansville, a lifelong resident of this community, a former student, teacher, literacy coach, and elementary school principal in the local public school system.
I'm Kate Linderman. I'm the Director of Collections at Evansville Vanderburgh Public Library. I've been with EVPL since 2005 and received my MLIS from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in 2009. At EVPL, I've served as what we used to call readers advisors, now an assistant librarian, branch manager, department supervisor, selector for nonfiction, and now in my current role, I oversee the collections and cataloging departments.
I'm Kurt Etheridge. I am a teen and adult librarian at Oakland Library, part of EVPL. I've worked here for about 6.5 years total. I'm also a writer. I was a Lambda Literary Fellow in 2018, and I've been published in various places, mostly short form.
Thank you. My name is Shane White. I'm the head of research services at the University of Southern Indiana. And while I'm here, I am not representing USI. I'm representing myself and my expertise as an academic librarian, having been an academic librarian since 2008, and for the past several years been heavily involved with ILF and in Freedom to Read, especially regarding intellectual freedom, and which encompasses book challenges and book banning.
So the first question I have is, of course, currently there's a lot of information out there in the news, a lot of buzz about book banning. While we described some of this in our introduction, could some of you all give us maybe a clearer definition of what book banning really is? Have any of you all ever experienced any kind of book challenges or book bans? And if not, do you know someone who may have?
So as far as the definition, if I may share something, one thing that my colleagues and I at ILF have discussed is we want to make it clear that book banning, a lot of people think of book banning and think of books removed. But the thing is, so far, the total number of actual removals is not nearly as high. It's still way too high than it should be. But we also have to take into account the number of challenges. Right? How many times we have people saying, we don't want this book in this library for our reasons. And sometimes the reasons can be good. A challenge can lead to a book not being removed, but moved to a different section or something like that, right? it's a nuance that I think gets lost in a lot of the media, that I think is important, especially for non-librarians to be aware of, that it's not just whether the book is removed, but it's also when people are making a formal complaint. And I also, again, this is more of a personal thing, but I also think it's important for us to mark down when there's informal complaints, right? Not only from a making sure that we are being equitable and making information available, but also, we have a way of thinking about things, but we serve our community in whatever capacity that might be. And so listening to a challenge isn't the same as agreeing with it. So I hope that makes some sense. I think it's important to keep that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that you mentioned that it's a very nuanced issue. You know, it's not like a black or white, a book is banned, it's not. There's a lot of complexity behind it. So thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that from a historian's point of view, book banning, we're focused on it right now, but book banning is something that's very old. And really, before there were printed books, we saw many, many examples going back to ancient history of people in power attempting to control what's said about them or about stuff that they consider important. And so you see examples in ancient China and ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and into the early modern period, probably what most people think of maybe is the Inquisition. So in the 1500s, the Index of Forbidden Books, which literally produced a list of books that the Roman Catholic Church sought to ban, and realized that oftentimes both sides of a debate will attempt to limit what is said by the other side by banning books or destroying books or seeking to remove books from public circulation. And then into the 20th century, we tend to think of this as something, as Americans, we tend to think of this as something that happens in other places. But there's been a pretty long tradition, really going back to the Puritans, of books being banned in the Americas, and then into the 20th century, books being banned really all through the 20th century because they didn't fit with a political or religious or cultural point of view. So we're living through something now that humans have been living through for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
Wow, that's a great point and good historical perspective. Yeah, thank you for that, James.
So one thing that I wanted to point out is that book bans often reflect discrimination and bias in the larger community. Book bans often occur when school boards, library boards, school or library administrations, teachers, or politicians override the careful decision-making process that teachers and librarians use to curate books, and that's often on the basis of a particular book's content. And this is something, so I don't have firsthand experience with this, but I do have secondhand experience. So my good friend Jen St. Jude is a young adult fiction author. They wrote the book If Tomorrow Doesn't Come, which is this gorgeous story about an older teenager, young college age student dealing with depression and sexuality, and set against the backdrop of the imminent end of the world. It's this gorgeous story, and teens are very drawn to it. It's something that they see themselves reflected in. And so, because it was something that the teens were interested in, Hamilton East Public Library in central Indiana was going to have a teen book club, teen book discussion that would feature that book. That event was canceled due to extreme pressure from political factions who disapproved because of the topics that that book addressed. And the event ended up not happening. And so while that book is still within that library system, it did limit access then. So it's not a full ban, but you have cut off a section of the population from engaging with it in the way they might have wanted to.
Sure. No, that's I think a really powerful example. And again, going back to the nuance, right? It's not just necessarily a removal from a shelf, but yeah, it could be challenges to programs, events. just highlighting certain books. I know sometimes, book displays and things like that. There may be objections to books that are highlighted and promoted in our collection. So good point. And that actually is a good segue to our next question. Can I take that?
So we want specifically to talk to librarians that we have on here about collection development practices and policies. We understand that, libraries are physical spaces that have their limits, as well as, budgetary limits and that sort of a thing. So how do librarians decide which books do get included in the collection?
I feel like maybe I should go first.
Go for it, Kate.
Um,
Director of Collections.
Of course, in a public library setting, it's probably different than an academic library setting, but also similar in some ways. But we do have a library material selection policy, which is approved and periodically reviewed by our Board of Trustees. So we follow that library material selection policy. Our library material selection policy has a lengthy list of how we select materials. But as a former selector and as director of collections, and I select fiction, once you do the job, you kind of get a feel for how to do it. In the public library setting, because we are publicly funded, we do try to provide as much as we can for all facets of our population. We read reviews, we consider different viewpoints, we consider diversity of our community, we consider diverse viewpoints and alternative viewpoints, opposing viewpoints, and that's how we try to build our collections. We have different selectors who focus on different areas. We have, and these are, people who have been, for example, our children's librarian, or I'm sorry, our children's selector is a former teacher who does all of our children's selection, fiction and nonfiction, and all of our young adult selection. And we do, now in the technological age, we get some assistance from vendors in the form of pre-made cards and things like that. But what we do on the ground is we do a lot of reading, we do a lot of research into reviews. We take into consideration our, like I said, all facets of our population and who we're serving, but also maybe who's underserved. And we consider customer requests. And that is where things like requests for reconsideration come in. And that is part of our material selection policy. So we can cover that part later, but it's a very broad document, but as librarians, we're able to, we sort of have all learned that special something that allows us to know which things to include and maybe which things don't get included or maybe get suggested by a customer. It's a very non-specific job. It's kind of a little bit of everything. A lot of reading, a lot of research, a lot of paying attention to trends.
Could I ask a question, Kate?
Sure.
Given what we've said about a climate where books are increasingly challenged or questioned, and given what you said, Kurt, about a particular book on a particular topic with particular themes, that is the kind of book that has been questioned in the last 5 to 10 years. Do you feel like that has a kind of dampening effect, that it's almost that you prejudge a book and think, ooh, this is the kind of book that someone is going to challenge, and so it maybe you lean towards not choosing a book that you would have chosen before?
Personally, I do not, and I don't believe that the current selectors that we have feel that way. But we also have a very supportive board of directors and administration, and it is explicitly mentioned in our library selection policy that we do have requests for reconsideration. But something will only come off the shelf if it is something that specifically does not fit within the guidelines of our selection policy. Have I selected books at times where I thought, wow, this one might get challenged? I have, but I think most librarians are seeing this now. We have to just put it out there and wait and see if it happens. And I do think that self-censorship is becoming a bit of an issue, that there are some libraries that are worried that things are going to be challenged. And so they're moving, some titles, young adult titles, or titles that people might deem, unsuitable for children or young adults to an adult section. I personally think that's a slippery slope. And I know that our administration at EVPL supports that viewpoint at this time. But these are strange times we're living in. So right now we are functioning the way we have traditionally at EVPL, and selecting for everyone in our community and everyone. And it's right now it's working for us. So
Right. Thank you.
I love what you're saying, Kate, because there's such a connection between the work that happens at the public library and what happens in the field of education. So that self-censoring is a huge concern for educators. And I feel like the library is setting that example of, we're going to do our best not to self-censor here.
yes.
And you're choosing books that meet the needs, and the makeup of our community, which is what we want our teachers to do as well, to make sure that they're meeting the needs of every child that's in their classroom. What do their families look like? What's their culture? And everyone doesn't have the same beliefs and values. So the library is setting such an awesome example for our future educators who are sometimes really stressed out about having to make those decisions.
I think Evansville is, our public library system is an excellent public library system. We're very lucky to have all of the professionals, paraprofessionals, and staff that we have, because we're all on the same page. We love the library, we love the community, and we want everyone to feel like this is a place where they can go to get information that they need, no matter what their world viewpoint. And I think it's important for us to stand firm on that. Right now, the folks that I work with in my department just are really, really good, conscientious librarians, and they ask the hard questions, they make the hard decisions. And luckily, we have not had, I think we had one challenge last year, and it was for an adult DVD. We, knock wood, have not had formal challenges, like other libraries have. But if we do, I have full confidence in the staff at EVPL to handle that, to sort of soldier through and handle it the way we always have. We just have an excellent staff here and an excellent supportive administrative staff. So, but these are strange times. It's scary.
I'm thankful for our public library. I'm a reader because of our public library. I spent most of my weekends with a great aunt who couldn't drive or do anything, but we could always ride the bus to the library and the museum and check out all the books that we wanted. And if it wasn't for the public library, I wouldn't have had any access to books.
And we hear that so much. And if you mentioned the word access is a huge part of this. And book challenges are essentially about creating a barrier to access. I've seen so many times on social media, and honestly, I try not to read comments on posts sometimes, but well, books aren't really banned. You can still go out and buy them, and that's true. But when you're working in a public library, there are many people who use our facilities who can't afford to go buy a book. It's not that easy. So it's about creating a barrier to access. And you think about, sometimes it's as simple as someone can't, make the drive from downtown to Barnes and Noble, or, so the library is a place for them to go to find these things. And if we don't have them, that's what's called a barrier to access. So.
Jane, did you want to say something as well?
I do. I'm playing into my role as a former colleague of mine would say, I'm the dark cloud of every silver lining. So real quick, academic libraries, we are a little bit different because we generally purchase materials specifically to support the academic goals of the campus, the programmatic goals. If we do have a policy, people can write a challenge or submit a challenge, and we will look at it. But most of the time, it's like, well, we have it because of this program. For instance, we might be challenged, not us, but I've seen it before where you might be challenged because you're carrying in your academic library a Holocaust denial literature. But the reason we do is because we may have a sociology professor, like we do here, who studies conspiracy theories and things like that. And so, of course, it's to the benefit of the students and the faculty to have those. So it's much easier for us to make that defense, I think. And I always want to point that out, especially to my colleagues, because I will be honest, yeah, I had scales in my eyes until I started working with ILF and the public librarians that I met through there. And the amount of challenges generally before this enormous uptick post-COVID, and even that to me was just really people are wanting to take away access to others just because they don't like it. That's so strange to me. That said, so part of my service on ILF for the Intellectual Freedom Committee, I'm a co-chair, and me and the other chair, we see challenges that come through. We have asked Indiana libraries to please submit data. Not they don't if they don't want to share what library they're from or whatever, that's understandable. But we need to know what books are being challenged and generally whereabouts, because that data, even though we're seeing these huge numbers, it's still not entirely accurate because there's a lot that we've learned people are not reporting for various reasons. And I was going to talk about that when we get to the next question. But I have seen from those reports, from those comments that we've gotten from librarians who don't want to share their personal information, they are self-censoring because they don't want to draw attention to their little library. They don't want to draw attention to their position. Or they've been told by their administrators, keep your head down. And so before they even have the challenge, like you said, we've already gone, some of them have already ended up in that slope because we've already seen, this is not just about banning books. It's about undermining education, undermining access to information. From my view of things, if you've been watching the challenges or the changes to how tax money allocation is being used to fund libraries and how many libraries across Indiana are now struggling, even at the federal level, the defunding of libraries and museums. There's various reasons why they might be trying to do that. Some of it financial, but I think also some of it ideological. And it's distressing because I've just gotten a glimpse of how many times already we've seen libraries who are under attack and fighting the good fight and getting the support they need, and others keeping their head down. And I can't fault them for it because they're in a very untenable situation, and oftentimes they are an oasis in an area that doesn't value, say, a library for its knowledge, but for its spaces, if you will. If that makes any sense, I can elaborate if you like, but it's distressing. And as Kate has said, these are strange times, and we do what we can, but my heart goes out to those librarians who are stuck in those positions right now.
Absolutely.
Shane, I have to say, I connect so strongly with what you were saying about, the repercussions that librarians face. One of the things in my children's literature course, there is coverage of a librarian who was really vilified in her community for, standing up for freedom to read. And so students talk about that. But it also reminds me, I shared a book with the children's literature class about Ruby Bridges and some of the history behind that. And the fact that her parents stood up for her to get her education, you know, resulted in her father losing his job, her grandparents who were sharecroppers losing their land. I mean, people pay tremendous prices for trying to stand up for what is right and what's just.
We
It
went
just seems so many people are talking about the importance of books to, in that books talk about diversity and books show diversity. And so people, especially young people who are, you know, maybe not used to seeing people that look like them in literature, you know, that book might be the one opportunity that they have to feel validated and to feel humanized. And I think that's an extremely important positive reason for having these books, and that's just really difficult in an era where the word diversity itself is has become almost a slur. And so, you know, maybe I think one thing that we have to always think about too is, you know, stand strong in our principles, but sometimes maybe we just have to find creative ways to talk about what we're doing that don't happen to feature these buzzwords that people are hearing on certain news channels all the time. And but the principle itself, I think, is terribly important, and it's I think the we're so fortunate to have librarians and administrators who, to this point in this community, have stood firm.
If I
Depths,
may,
the
go
depths
ahead.
that some people will go to. I live outside of Vanderburgh County, our local library. We had some people, you know, challenging some of the books there. And of course, the library wouldn't remove them from the shelves or anything. So, what that person chose to do is they went to the library and checked all the books out
Mm-hmm.
and kept them checked out to keep anyone from being able to have access.
That is becoming more normal. I've seen many articles about that across the country, sadly. So another anecdote about that, me and our group for intellectual freedom, one of the things we've been doing is doing mock book challenge discussions, and it's primarily aimed for people to see what do these committees look like, what do they sound like, that sort of thing. And I wish I can't remember the book now, but we're doing 3 books, and the second one I believe was Speak. I think that's what it was. And one of the people sort of leading this, who's a school librarian, and she was like, you know, I was shocked I don't have this book. So I went ahead and ordered it. She ordered it from Amazon, and when it arrived, it was already been defaced. And so she was tempted to send it back, but she just ordered a second one because she wanted it as sort of a reminder of like, this isn't just the library, right? She bought this book herself, and it's still, you know, so I, it's shocking, you know, it's shocking. One of the things I try to impart to my colleagues in the academic library setting, because there's this sort of artificial, like, you know, you have academic, public, and school, and then special libraries, which we won't talk about. But you know, we're very different, but it's like, but we all feed into each other, right? And one of the things that stresses me out about these is your students, the ones that go to the public school when they're kids, to programming, to get access to books, to get access to film, to whatever. The school libraries, when they come to us, if they don't have access, their world is that much more narrow. And we have that much more work ahead of us just to get them to think beyond the confines of their neighborhood. And that was one of the reasons I was propelled into this situation of thinking about like, what can I do to help? Because it's important for all of us. We want an educated populace. We want people to have a broad view of things so that they can deal with those things when they inevitably come up. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there. I think it's a perspective that gets lost on some of my, not here, but other places I've visited, might get lost on those people.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of going off of that. One of the notes that I wrote to myself when I was preparing for this is literacy is foundational to freedom. If you don't have access to books, if you don't have access to early literacy education, if you don't have that foundation, then you're automatically a step back. It's that much harder for you in life. You know, literacy provides a person, it's not just being able to read words on a page, it's being able to engage with them and engage with a text and understand the meanings behind words. It allows you to think critically. It allows you to not just, you know, there's so many different books in the world. A person's never going to be able to read all of them, but by reading broadly and deeply, you become exposed to all kinds of different cultures and backgrounds and experiences. And then that teaches you that when you go out into the world as an adult and as a person, it shows you how to learn about other cultures, how to be open, how to ask questions. And that's something that's really important to me. And I really appreciated what you said, Shane, about the fact that those kids come up and then they're the people you encounter at the university. On a personal note, I'm the father of 2 children, and my oldest just started kindergarten at a public school. And I often think about this, you know, what does her classroom library look like? What books does she have access to there? You know, she is very lucky, privileged, in that she does have a father who's a librarian and a mother who's a former teacher, is a substitute teacher, you know, and that we are very open. We let her pick out what books she wants and we sort of teach her those things. Most kids don't have that, or a lot of kids don't. And so if these public free spaces like public schools, like public libraries, close off access to certain titles, I mean, it affects all of it, every single part of society and of a democracy.
Yeah, well
And-
said.
And that includes things we don't like,
Yes.
regardless of your political side, right?
100%.
I want my stepdaughter to be able to read and take apart what she reads, right? Because that's how you can understand other people and other viewpoints. Doesn't mean you agree with them, but it means that you can come to an understanding or work with them. So I think you hit the nail on the head there, Kurt.
Absolutely. We talk a lot about, you know, a parent has a right perhaps to restrict what their own child is reading, but definitely not to restrict the reading of all the other children in the class or the school.
Well, I feel like some of us have already kind of covered this, but the next question was from a purely professional standpoint, how do threats to freedom of information and book challenges impact your work, either as an author, librarian, researcher, or educator? Again, I know some of you have already kind of hit on that, but if there's anything you'd like to add.
I'm just going to jump in. I think as a librarian, it obviously, especially the increased level of action in challenges and bannings, has made it a little bit scary to be a librarian. But at the same time, it has it has pushed me to learn more about what I'm doing, learn more about this action, these things that are happening, so that I can, you know, answer the hard questions and help people. Like I said, we already have a really good staff at EVPL. But I do want to be available to people who maybe aren't comfortable interacting with customers who have particular issues with books. I see in this climate right now that, you know, that's one of the things that I, as a leader in my department and my position, I need to be prepared for that, to back up staff and to back up um, the people on the front lines that are dealing with a lot of this, even if they aren't formal challenges, people who come in and register displeasure with things that we have on the shelf. So in that respect, I spend a lot more time thinking about it than I ever did before. I think there was a real false sense of security that we had about what we do, and the nobility of what we do, and that everyone respects what we do, and that we serve the population as a whole, and how we think about that. And I think it's been kind of a wake-up call for at least public librarians, in the sense that we really do try to provide information for everyone as much as it is appropriate and as much as it falls within our selection guidelines. It's sort of made, as a librarian, and I think Kurt could probably speak to this too, especially from a frontline librarian position and a youth, an adult and teen librarian, that it really has made us think a lot more about these possibilities and how we handle them going forward, how we handle talking to the community about this going forward.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of, regardless of whether we're getting formal challenges, right? I think that there's a certain energy that people approach us with sometimes, where we as librarians are sort of seen as almost threatening or dangerous in some way, which is so strange to me. To be a source of almost, I guess, discomfort or fear or whatever. And there have certainly been times, I think what frustrates me, again, I am a parent and I understand wanting to raise your children with whatever, cultural, religious framework you have, right? But there have been times where people have been so upset with us about a certain title that might be, it's a book meant for children, so it's in the children's section, but there will be a parent or guardian who is so upset to see that because of the culture or experience it represents, that they really end up speaking in a way that feels disrespectful. There's been more than once where someone has made one of my coworkers cry. And that's very difficult to see, because really, at the end of the day, my goal is never to, I'm not here to harm children or to harm youth. I'm here to work with teens. That's my whole purpose here. I think that youth are a very disadvantaged group as a whole. I think that they are often marginalized in a way. They already struggle to access information they might need. They are reliant on adults for transportation and things. And so I think there's just a lot of distrust that makes our job a lot more difficult. And that's frustrating, because I'm here to serve all of our patrons, even the ones who, on a personal level, probably wouldn't like me, right? I'm here for everyone. And yeah, I don't know where we go to rebuild that trust, but I know that the current climate does not help it.
That's one of the things I wrote down in my notes. The concern is that erosion of trust. And, with librarians and with educators, like Kurt said, teachers don't take that job to do any harm to children.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a passion when someone chooses to teach. And there's so many concerns. It narrows the perspectives that people can have. It narrows their exposure to people who are different from them, who have different beliefs and values. It puts the teachers in a position of this moral dilemma. Do I follow the mandate that's put before me, or do I do what I know is right for the children that I'm serving? It just it creates a lot of concerns. And we talk about the research that the more that people read, typically the more empathy that they will have for others, because they have so much more exposure to people that are different and have different problems than they do, face, different trials and tribulations. And you lose all of that when you limit what people can read.
If I may, Lisa, one of the things that I remember reading some years ago was research that showed reading narrative, especially narrative fiction, really actually lights up the part of our brain that is empathetic and works that muscle, so to speak, more than any other medium or any other type of writing. And it's because we're literally put oftentimes in the shoes of other people in a way that we simply never are. And I think about that a lot whenever I think, what are our kids losing access to? Not just seeing people who are not like themselves, but being able to look outside of themselves on any level. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
when you look at oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that what the four of you have said, I think there's real connection there. And Kate, you're talking about this process has forced you to kind of re-examine your motivations and be able to articulate that. And Kurt, you were talking about people who are approaching you seeming to come from a place of fear. And then Shane and Lisa talking about empathy, that it's really difficult for us, I think, but I think we also have to, in some ways, put ourselves in the shoes of the people who are bringing the challenges.
Yeah.
And I think if you can see that, although it's maybe manifesting, Kurt, as anger or disrespect, as you said, that ultimately it's coming from a place of fear and probably a misplaced fear. And if you can maybe understand that, maybe we can articulate better back to them why this book or that book is on the shelf, for the very reasons that Shane and Lisa have pointed out. And that idea that their kid being exposed to something that's different, while maybe it's difficult for their family at this moment, down the road it might benefit them because of the skills that it's going to build for their child.
If I may, that to that end, one of the things that we've discussed is always and this guy, I know we're going to cover this a little bit more later, but even if they don't see the value in seeing other sides, right? Reminding them, well, what if we said you could not read this book that you like?
Right.
What if we took that? What if we said that, because if they prevailed with government speech arguments that they keep trotting out in some of these lawsuits, that we can no longer have the Bible or any other religious text in a public library. How would that make you feel? What do you think, about the First Amendment issues there? I mean, there's ways to try to at least plant that seed. And you never know if it's going to take hold, but it's you want to try to meet them halfway, and some might, especially if you can sort of break them out of that fear of I don't know, and I don't know anyone else here, so I'm going to say this. But the other side of that is you do have these people who are essentially just part of an astroturfing where they have a long list of books they want to challenge. And it's something they printed off of some website or got from some organization. And I don't think you can really talk those people down, not at least not in that moment. That's where policy is so important.
I think when we look at some of the greatest books that have been challenged, even before the Civil War, Uncle Tom's Cabin, because it was condemning slavery, the reason that it's banned is that a good reason? Grapes of Wrath, because of how it portrayed immigrant workers, and To Kill a Mockingbird, a book that's extremely popular that talks about just racism and injustice. And really the message there is to be anti-racist. And yet it's a book that is so challenged. I think, yeah, we just have to look at the reasoning and the rationale behind it. And I do think it's a very small number of people that make most of these challenges and requests.
If I may, I wanted to address one other professional standpoint here. So my area of work is primarily with research assistants and library instruction. So teaching people how to find information, how to evaluate it, that sort of thing. And usually in the most inorganic way possible. But joking aside, in the past, it's been fairly easy when we get students who are requesting information for, well, let's say you have a student who's like, look, I'm trying to do this research and I've already written my paper, but I just need some articles to support this argument that being trans is a mental illness. And it's like, okay, first, you're starting from the wrong direction, right? You shouldn't have written your paper before you did your research. I mean, that's research 101. And I would have said, there's a reason why you're not finding research on that, or that's proving your point, at least not reliable research, and try to have a gentle conversation about that. With the laws that have been enacted over this past summer, over the past couple of years, where tenure now amounts to practically nothing, where we have to be reviewed and can be, we can have anonymous reporting because we are not promoting diversity of thought. I have to be much more careful. I honestly don't know how I respond to that person now, as far as saying there's no research on this because you're wrong. Again, I wouldn't say exactly that way, but I would try to lead them to understand, follow the research, don't write the report and then find the research. But I have to now be much more circumspect. And you would think that wouldn't happen very often, but it's at least several times a year where we have students who come in with very preconceived notions, and to them, getting the degree is checking off a box and paying your bill. And how do I discuss with them in a way to say, research and going through these books and going through these materials is important because it's a part of the process of learning, without me potentially getting cited for, not promoting their diversity of thought. Granted, that's somewhat more academically focused, like what's impacted us. But because many of us in the public school, or many librarians in public universities are faculty in tenure track, it does have an impact on us. And again, to me, this is all of a kind. This is all coming from the same sources.
So we have talked now about how book challenges and these barriers to access, like we said, affect all of our different professions. But if we're looking at it from a personal perspective as a reader, how are these challenges affecting you in that way? And is there any book that you all have had access to as, a child or at some other point through your life that you're really glad that you had that impact of it?
Mm-hmm.
Say, looks like Kurt's ready to talk about that.
Yes, I am. Although this is actually not the original, but when I always say, when I was a high schooler at my home library at the time would have been North Park. The number of LGBT YA books, there were two, and they were both written by Dave Levithan, which is fine. He's a great author. But that was my first exposure to just like having that mirror, right? Seeing some kind of reflection of myself. And this is actually the sequel remix of the book, but the original book was called Wide Awake, and it was this imagined future where there was a gay Jewish man running for president. And there's this group of teenagers of a variety of backgrounds and experiences who are working on his campaign and all coming together in sort of this hopeful congregation, toward this future that is sort of what, melting pot, whether or not we are a melting pot, the things that the United States supposedly is about. And it made such an impression on me to open a book and have it just lay out, be like, this person is gay, things like that. There was no other place where I saw myself. I certainly didn't see myself in the school that I went to. I didn't really see myself in media. I think that the closest thing to gay media that I had access to was Glee, things like that, being able to see yourself in fiction has just such an enormous impact. And as I've gone through life, I've been able to see from that time when I was a high schooler to now where I'm a teen librarian, there are so many different titles on our shelves by authors of a variety of experiences and backgrounds and sexualities and genders. And there are all kinds of stories. And I don't know that the teens that I serve always understand what wealth they have now, but they really do. And I don't want them to lose that in any way because it does make such a difference. One of the things that I do, I provide outreach through the library to Greater Evansville Youth by IYG, which is a youth group that supports LGBTQ youth and adults. And they're doing so much better because they have access to resources. And I just can't imagine taking that away from them. And that is also why it is so important to be able, as a librarian, public librarian, to provide resources to groups like that, who historically have not been served as well. And yeah, it's so much better than it was. And there's always the potential for it to get worse again.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody on this call actually can relate when I say that I have to remind myself, starting with what kind of books, had an impact and so forth. Those of us who go into academia, who go into libraries, who value education even at a young age, many of us we're not like the other girls, right? We had, I could read before I got to kindergarten, and I mean like read. My grandmother was and I spent every weekend and summer with her until high school, but she was a special needs educator. This was back when she never had an education degree, but she taught phonics to these students. And so she taught me almost, as far back as I can remember. And by the time I was in second grade, I was reading, not fully understanding, but reading things like Stephen King and stuff, because that was on our shelves. I was reading books about animals, not like picture books, and I'm not trying to say, it was anything special, but I think about that and like if you said what was one book, I can't point to one book. I pulled so much from so many. But I think, and this kind of gets back to what Kurt was saying, you never know what's going to have an impact. And so every time we cut a book, you're cutting that potential avenue. You're cutting off someone maybe having that aha moment.
Right.
And that's what I think about whenever I see any book challenge or any book wanting to be removed. It's like, you don't know who or how this book might impact somebody. And I think that's something that if I could impart that to the powers that be, it's like, before you make these decisions, before you challenge, before you tell libraries they can't have something, imagine if some book or something that helped shift you to where you are, what if you were told, no, you can't read that? Or you were never even made aware it existed? I I think that's so important. And again, I think about that every time I pick up something new that I didn't know about. Um, Children of Man, is that what it's called? I'm terrible at titles. It's an old book written by Arthur C. Clarke. I didn't hear about it till last year, and it's a really interesting book. And it's about what happens in a utopian society, blah, blah, blah. I don't actually care for utopian literature, but it was a really neat book. I I never would have come across it. Why didn't I? Who knows? But here it is. Now, what if that had been removed and I never knew it existed? You know, I wouldn't have some of these thoughts going around in my head right now, like I've been thinking about the past several days. So that's a little flowery, I guess, but it's, I think, important because people forget that we put too much emphasis on the idea of I do X to get Y. And I think reading, especially reading for pleasure and exploring, it's serendipitous. You don't know what you're going to pull from it. And if you don't know and you don't look beyond, what you need in this moment, and you cut it out because you don't need it, what are you doing to other people? And ultimately, what are you doing to yourself? All right, I'll be quiet.
Yeah, I'm glad to meet somebody else who was reading Stephen King at like 7.
Shane, I was the same way. I grew up in a family of readers. Both sets of grandparents were readers. My father was a huge reader. And I never saw my parents, either one of them, without a book. And so we had access, just books everywhere when I was growing up. And I mean, I wasn't reading Stephen King when I was that young, but the first book I remember reading cover to cover was Evergreen by Belva Plain. And I was like 10. I didn't fully understand it, but it really was the book. It's historical fiction and kind of a love story. And it really was something that sparked my interest in history. I went on to, study history in college. And anyway, and my parents never, that was not, by today's standards, you wouldn't hand that book to a 10-year-old. My parents never stopped me from reading what I wanted to read. And of course, that was the 70s. So there was, to what Kurt's saying, there was a very limited amount of material for kids, preteens and teenagers to read that really addressed anything they were going through. I'm a Judy Blume era, young adult kid. So, Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret, and all of those books introduced me to concepts that, even though I was incredibly blessed to have the parents I did, they did grow up at a certain time where maybe they weren't comfortable talking about things. They certainly were available and would have, but these books helped me learn things about myself that, even I may not have been able to go to my parents and talk to them about. And so, again, to what Kurt's saying, we're so incredibly lucky to have what we have now. We've progressed through the years to have such a wonderful wealth of literature for young people. And it is scary to think, that we might slide backward on that, and those things might not be accessible to kids. And then you can establish a dialogue with your child when they have questions. And as a parent, you can tailor your answers in whatever way you want to. That is, that's the beauty of it. You can have conversations with your children, or if you don't want, it's all about your own choices, but the choice shouldn't begin at whether or not the material is available. In my opinion, that's my opinion, sorry.
The book that really impacted me as a child is not one that's faced a ton of bans, but it has been challenged and has faced some bans, and that was Louisa May Alcott's Little Women. And I think it impacted me because it was maybe more challenged because of women's suffrage and equality and things like that, unladylike behavior. But I think more than anything, it communicated to me that, women can do anything that they set their mind to. And in fact, this summer, I was in Boston and actually went to Louisa May Alcott's home and the progressive school that her father ran, and learned there that everything in the book wasn't exactly from her life, that Poppy didn't actually go off to war. It was her. It was Louisa May Alcott who went to war, not her father. And I never knew that. So, yeah, I think just the things that you can learn and grasp, especially I'm a huge fan of children's literature because I'm just thankful. Like Shane, I don't remember learning how to read. I just remember always being a reader, and it's such a gift. I feel very lucky and privileged that I know how to read, and I had access to a public library like the one we have in Evansville. That just really opened up the world to me. We take all of our education students to the Vandenberg Public Library for a tour, and they are in awe, especially students that maybe come from smaller towns or cities that just don't have a library like the one that we have that does all the things that we do. So here, just feel very lucky and very thankful to the people who write these books that take us all over the world.
In a funny way, I'm not a religious person now, but the King James Version of the Bible was literally what I learned to read on. My dad was a minister, and we read the Bible in our house every morning and every evening. And as a small child, I followed along and just repeated the words after him. And I think having that sort of depth of knowledge of that language, I think was a really good basis for understanding an awful lot of literature allusions and so on, and just kind of appreciating the beauty of old language that's difficult and that you need to work at. I think was something that really stuck with me. And then the second thing I would say is just not a specific book, but just the sense in which books took you away. There were passages of your childhood that maybe were not as good as others, and books were a way to just get away and escape and adventure, and outlet, all of these things. And I was utterly dependent on the public library system in my hometown, and I'll never really forget and never not appreciate public libraries because they always, even today, the smell of a library, as soon as I walk in, I just kind of brings back that old feeling that you're going somewhere really cool, and there's no limit to where you go. I mean, if this computer was in my bedroom, in the background would be a pile of about 24 books from the EVPL, that we're working our way through. So I just think it's an amazing, and the EVPL is really a truly remarkable asset in our community. And I think it is something that lots of folks take for granted, but I hope you guys that dedicate your lives to it realize how much it is appreciated. Um, and so definitely say that. And then the last thing I wanted to say is unfortunately a kind of negative, that I also feel like one of the biggest challenges that we face is just the issue of young people not reading. You know, the book banners still place great importance on books because of the importance of books and what a huge impact books have on children, as you all have said. But it's increasingly obvious, I'm sure it is to all of you, that young people's first choice is to get information from YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, or never mind online encyclopedias, but just reading for pleasure. I mean, even in my own family, I've seen the my oldest read for pleasure, my middle child read less for pleasure, and my youngest reads hardly at all for pleasure. And that's in a house where books are front and center. And I kind of despair sometimes, that the future is dark because kids are not going to be reading. Please tell me I'm wrong.
No, I was agreeing with you. I see the same. I only have two kids and I see the same thing. Although I have my older daughter who graduated from college a year ago, has ticked back up in her reading for pleasure.
Mhm.
And we recently went on vacation. My younger daughter, who is not much of a pleasure reader, but was as a kid, and then it just completely dropped off. There's a favorite bookstore. We went to Marquette, Michigan. I dragged them to the bookstore, as I always do, and my younger daughter picked up a book, and she was kind of bored because the place where we were staying didn't have a TV or anything like that. So I was like, if you want the book, I'll buy it for you. And I bought it for her, and she read it cover to cover. So I was that gave me a little sliver of hope. But I agree. I think there is definitely going to be, especially with people high school and younger, they do get the majority of their information from TikTok or YouTube. And they don't read. They don't enjoy reading. They don't. It's not impacted them the way it has impacted the rest of us. Or even, actually, my sister and I were just talking about this the other day. Even within like micro generations, Gen Z. Some of the older Gen Z kids do still read a lot. The younger ones, not so much. So it is going to be a challenge for us to get people back into reading. One of the reasons well, obviously everybody likes electronic books, but they're very, very popular with millennials, especially audiobooks. So that's a challenge that we face from a selection standpoint, is maintaining that availability so that we keep people reading. Of course, I prefer a book in my hand. I'm a certain generation, so that's another place where I kind of have to sort of, to what Shane was saying, accept, electronic books are here to stay. A lot of people like to listen to audiobooks, and I have never judged how people read or get their information. But some people do. Anyway, what I'm saying is, I think as librarians, we that's a challenge for us, and we need to, continue to adapt with the times. And a lot of our public service librarians, I think, do a great job making programs and bringing in kids to engage them with the library. So hopefully we're making some kind of inroads there, I hope.
I will say, as someone who works primarily with teens, I do hear a lot, like, I don't read, or I only read fan fiction or whatever. But I do have some teens who come to a book club that I run that will literally be like, actually, here's a 2,000-word essay I wrote just for fun on the book we read. Or one who sometimes like will purchase a book if she has the money because she just really needed to annotate it. And she make sure at the beginning of the book club we know, like, okay, these colors mean this and this means that, and has all these
That's
like sticky
great.
notes and stuff. So there are definitely some teens still out there who are very much enjoying reading.
I do find it interesting. Just kind of go back. I apologize. I forget who made the comment, but maybe it was you, James. But you almost want to say to people who want to ban the books for the safety of the kids. You'd be like, why are you concerned? I bet your child, like my stepdaughter, is watching shorts on YouTube and driving me insane. And the thing is, like, we want to, obviously it's flippant. We want to make sure that these things are there, but it is sort of a two-pronged challenge, right? We want people to read and to access material, but would you rather stay in your home and flip on your phone over and over and over, or do you want to go, across town to the library, search out a book? I mean, I know which one I prefer, but I get to some extent that sort of siren call of, well, my phone's right just here.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it does it again. I think that's another reason I think these challenges and some of the other things that I've alluded to, as far as like the challenges to education, are just that. There's either financial incentive or ideological incentive, sometimes both, for people to dismantle these things, because they'd rather us all stick on our phones, stay in our house, and just watch short things, destroying our attention span.
Yeah.
Right.
As someone who has a much shorter attention span than he used to.
Same.
Yeah, I think another thing that the EVPL does an incredible job of is providing um, ebooks and audiobooks. I would say probably 60% of the books that I consume are via one or other of these. It's like sometimes I pull new books off the shelf, take a photo of them, and go home and get the ebook. Um, so it's really fantastic. Um, and so, you know, that's I think an upside, Shane, that you could be sitting at home scrolling on your phone and you know, or reading something on your phone, and then you go, "Ooh, I want that book as well." And 2 minutes later, you've got that downloaded to Kindle through your phone from the public library. It's really just amazing. So you guys are doing an amazing job.
To that end, yeah, a lot of USI students are commuters, and many of them are not aware that they even like they might live outside of Evansville. I'm like,
Hmm.
you're a USI student, you have access to EVPL. And so putting them onto that and they're able to get access because some of the other libraries that they have are much smaller and they don't have
Hmm.
a lot of digital access. But it's like I've had a few come back and say, I'm so glad you told me that because that's what they do. They listen to audiobooks as they're driving to and from school. Because especially with the construction, we are not close to anything anymore. And so a lot of people like that's how they get through that driving across town, going to work, coming to school. Um, and so I think that is an invaluable service that's being offered to our students through you guys.
I want to end our last question. This is, you know, hopefully um, a lighter note, hopefully to what we've discussed today. But what can we do? How do you all advocate for the freedom to read? And what advice do you have for others to do the same?
I have so much, and I promise I won't talk after that. So I'm saying this in part from my work with ILF, um, and I'm telling you in the hopes that you'll spread this around, especially the two non-librarians with us. So we have ILF has advocacy. We have a committee that specifically focuses on laws that impact libraries of all stripes, and ILF has a lawyer that they employ specifically to lobby on our behalf. One of the things that we keep coming back to is there's only so much they're actually going to listen to us about, and by that I mean the legislatures. We need our fans. We need people who believe in education. We need people who, even if they're not heavy library users, but believe in strong community resources, we need them to be ready to mobilize because oftentimes that is the difference between something being passed, in the dark of night and no one knowing about it to something's being stopped in its tracks and, keeping a library open for another year. And I hate to make that sound so dark, but librarians, we care a lot, but they're going to listen to voters more than they're going to listen to us librarians because well, you guys only care about your job. That's why you're saying. I'm not saying that's what they say, but it's easy to dismiss us. We need our communities to stand up for us at this time, whenever possible. Make use of us, but more than that, be aware, know what your state legislature is trying to do, not just in book challenges, but in financing the library, financing public good, financing public works. Make sure you're aware of what's going on in the State House. It's work. But if you want that information, there is In Freedom to Read, which is partnered with ILF, and that is the Indiana chapter of the Freedom to Read. And we post out to members, not just librarians, but any member, and it's a free sign up. We'll let you know when a book challenge is happening at a formal meeting that is open to the public. We send out notifications of legislatures changes where they're asking for citizen feedback, but maybe they're doing it quietly. We bullhorn that. So that's one way. If you're a non-librarian, even if you are a librarian, being a part of In Freedom to Read, and just being on the lookout for what's going on. not assuming everything is fine or only paying attention to what's happening at the federal level. The other thing librarians especially could do, something that I learned, and EVPL is not, this is not an issue for you all, but when we started trying to support libraries that are experiencing challenges, one of the things we discovered is a lot of libraries didn't have their policies posted, didn't have challenge policies firmly in place. Make sure all that's there and make sure there's good communication between those, what those policies are, how you created them, and communicate that to your board, communicate that to your whoever you work with, your administrators. In our experience so far, we, even in places that seem somewhat hostile to libraries, the board and the school administrators are very much wanting to support the library, but they need information too. And so the more you give them in their arsenal, the stronger advocates they can be. And if you're not sure what to do with that, send them to, or you yourself reach out to the Intellectual Freedom Committee of ILF, and we have toolkits and we have suggestions. We're here, to help you navigate that. But I think, as trite as it sounds, communication with your colleagues and communication with your constituents. Make sure that you're letting people know, especially if you know that you've got heavy users, heavy supporters of your libraries, your programs. Make sure they're aware. And I'll end that on this, but it was mentioned early on. I apologize again. I don't remember who said it, but we're in a weird situation, and I don't think any of us thought when I become a librarian, I'm going to have to be a soldier for information and access. We're librarians. We just want to help people find things and make a nice space and support our community. We're not, and I sometimes think that might be one reason why we're a target, is that we're not hard-headed, bull in a china shop kind of people. We want to work together. We want to be supportive. And it's easy for some people to take advantage of that. But we are in the situation, and I think we can meet that challenge, especially if we have our constituents at our back. Okay, I'll be quiet.
Thank you.
I agree with what everything that Shane just said. I think from my standpoint, what I said earlier about making sure that I'm there to support our frontline staff, and from a back of house standpoint, supporting my selection staff and their decisions to select for our collection and stand behind those things that are in our collection, is probably the most important role I can play right now. But I really do feel strongly about having, like Shane said, communication with staff, and also, trying if we can to open the lines of communication with our customers about, what's in our collection. And if this doesn't serve you, then of course we have this here to serve you, and how it's about, being part of a community and, being active in the community and supporting everyone who lives in the community. I'm going to let the next person talk, I guess.
I think too, attending school board meetings would be very important, to just be aware if there are bans or, challenges happening. I agree with Shane about being aware of the political landscape. I don't think a lot of people, especially in our local community, may have been aware that, there are local elected positions that have great impact on public libraries. So making sure that we do know who we're voting for and what they're about, and that they're going to promote library funding. And then, celebrating banned book weeks. Those are, some of the best books that are out there, typically the ones that have ended up in a banned book list or something like that. And just really emphasizing to our friends and neighbors and colleagues that this is an important part of democracy, the freedom to read what you're interested in reading. That would be my take.
Thank you, Lisa. Kurt, did you want to respond?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking of from two different perspectives, kind of, I guess, what other people can do, echoing what everyone else has said. Libraries are a community space that are highly influenced by local politics, state politics. It's a lot to stay on top of, but again, there's that ILF information that Shane provided that's really useful. I think also just, taking the time to read to your kids, with your kids, read yourself, there's a whole variety of book clubs that EVBL provides. I mean, basically any topic that you're interested in, there's a book club. Join those and sort of become part of that communal aspect of reading. And then that lets you, as a library patron, then you're in the library more, you see the library, and maybe you see more of the library's needs. As far as what I'm trying to do, a lot of it is community building, if we can reach out into the community, be a presence in the community as a library system, then people get to know us as people. And that takes away some of that fear. Suddenly I'm not just someone who's making these decisions about books that people may or may not want their children to read. I'm just Kurt, who you see, once a month at your book club, or who you see every Friday when you come into the library with your kids. Things like that, I think really are important, even if it doesn't feel like they immediately make a difference. I really do believe in the power of community. And another thing I'm trying to do with teens, especially, we have a teen advisory council here at Oakland that meets once a month. And what I'm having the teens do is essentially see what the inner workings of a library are like. And to that end, they've been curating displays. And so I've shown them, what goes into choosing a book, what goes into displaying a book. So then they have to have those thought processes, and then maybe they understand a little more about why a library matters, why having a whole variety of books matters. And I think my hope is that even if that does not ultimately solve the issue of banned books, which I do not think will ever be fully solved. Dr. McLeod, at the beginning, you said something about, this is an age-old issue. But I think that every little bit helps. Every little bit of goodwill that we build with the community as librarians, every little bit of understanding that people have about why different stories matter, those things add up. And I think that that's really what will help us the most.
Yeah, great. Does anyone have any other last thoughts they'd like to share before we end? Well, I just want to say I really appreciate you all being here and taking the time to share your perspective, your thoughts, as both professionals, but also as readers and as human beings and as members of a community. It's been a very enlightening discussion, very informational. I know I've learned something. And it's just been great to talk to you all. So I really, really, truly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Yeah.
organizing it, and thank you
Yes,
guys
thank
for
you.
Thank you so much.
facilitating.